Come in. Come in. Good to see you again. Have a seat. I enjoyed reading Yeats the other day. I thought we might just, partly for the sheer sense of contrast and the different sort of flavours of English writers, we might go into the 18th century. This is not really my century. I'm more of a, the metaphysicals in the 17th or the romantics in the 19th, but there are some exceptions, and one of them, in fact, this may have excited your curiosity. You've probably seen just behind me in my pin-up of the great Samuel Johnson, Dr. Johnson, one of the superb characters as well as writers of the whole range of English literature, and a sort of essential character. There's something very quintessentially English about him, which you feel even more so because, of course, Boswell, his ardent biographer, is a slight, slender Scotsman, whom Johnson teases, of course, about Scotland all the time. And Johnson is this big, burly, rambling sort of bear of a man. In fact, he had a thing called a journal called The Rambler. Gruff, apparently, a little bit hard to get to know, but of course tremendously affectionate and full of goodness and strength and consolation to those who spent time with him. And as one reads, you don't get this so much from Boswell, but you get it from more recent biographers. You realise that among the many afflictions, I mean, he had various illnesses. He was a widower for a long time, but he actually suffered from really quite severe fits of depression and somehow kind of battled through them. And he was a man of immensely strong faith, a faith that balanced well with his reason. And of course, most famously, apart from the dictionary, he was a great reader of literature and really almost founded a lot of the discipline of literary criticism. And again, famously in his last years, a great talker, and people gathered around him. And luckily, we have Boswell too. So I like Johnson. He's a kind of sometimes a bit of a sort of acerbic thing. When I get overindulge my romantics, which I like to do sometimes, I need a bit of Johnson to steady me. And after I'd finished working on Coleridge, I really needed Johnson as a kind of recovery mode. There's another picture of Johnson here, which is Johnson in his travelling outfit. I just love that. So, hello George. Johnson famously went on a tour of the Hebrides with Boswell, and they both wrote about it. I've got all kinds of Johnsoniana. Hang on, I'll just get this for you because it'll. Again, in that same Oxfam shop that I bought the Yeats, I bought for £10 for the 2 volumes. This beautiful Folio Society, Boswell's Life of Johnson. This is volume 1. I've got the other one upstairs by my bedside, but I'll just open it up because it's got this rather fine picture. You remember when we read that letter of Lewis's about how the Johnson atmosphere, the sense of everybody sitting around while the great man spoke. That's a rather nice picture of them at the tavern, and there's Johnson, of course. Anyway, I won't refer to this one. I also have, everybody should have several editions of Boswell's Life of Johnson according to need, and I have, actually the one I read from most, apart from the volume upstairs, I bought, again, very cheaply, a little Dent, the Temple Classics series, Boswell's Life of Johnson, in 6 volumes. This is volume 5. The great thing about these is you can slip them into your pocket, and when you're off on a railway journey, in the days when we made railway journeys, you can just dip into it. The thing about Boswell's Life of Johnson is it's not really a consecutive narrative apart from the beginning. It's a series of anecdotes and stories in which you get to sit with him at Johnson's table and just take part in these wonderful conversations at the Mitre and the other places where he and Burke and Oliver Goldsmith and all the rest of them met. Anyway, I'm opening this, not quite at random, but this passage I want to read to you just notes the fact that in this particular year, which was 1781, Johnson completed his lives of the poets. And Boswell tells us a really interesting detail about Johnson as a writer. This is Boswell. In 1781, Johnson at last completed his lives of the poets, of which he gives this account, quote, so this is Johnson now. Sometime in March, I finished the lives of the poets, which I wrote in my usual way, dilatory and hastily, unwilling to work, and working with vigour and haste. That's just spot on. That sense you have as a writer that you're not getting on with it, you're being dilatory, that you're unwilling to do it. You think, come on, I'm a writer. I always wanted to be a writer. Why can't I write? And you kind of slouch about the place. And then suddenly you really get on with it and you actually work very hard indeed, working with vigour and haste. Johnson only wrote for deadlines and he wrote for money. I mean, he liked writing too, but he was a real, professional hack as well. And then he adds in a memorandum, previous to this, Boswell tells us he adds about this book, The Lives of the Poets. Written, I hope, in such a manner as may tend to the promotion of piety. Isn't that interesting? They're the lives of the poets, not always very exemplary lives, but there's something about poets and poetry which Johnson feels might kindle in us our love of Christ. And then, having quoted that, Boswell gives this very fine assessment of Johnson's lives of the poets. This is the work which of all Dr. Johnson's writings will perhaps be read most generally and with most pleasure. Philology and biography were his favourite pursuits, and those who lived most in intimacy with him heard him upon all occasions when there was a proper opportunity, take delight in expatiating upon the various merits of the English poets. Another thing I feel I have in common in a small way with Johnson is that I too take delight whenever opportunity arises in expatiating on the various merits of the English poets. John Boswell goes on, upon the niceties of their characters and the events of their progress through the world, which they contributed to illuminate. And then this is interesting. His mind was so full of that kind of information, and it was so well arranged in his memory, that in performing what he had undertaken in this way, he had little more to do than put his thoughts upon paper, exhibiting first each poet's life, and then subjoining a critical examination of his genius and works. But when he began to write, the subject swelled in such a manner that instead of prefaces to each poet of no more than a few pages as he had originally intended, he produced an ample, rich, and most entertaining view of them in every respect. Ample, rich, and most entertaining. That's exactly what you want in writing about literature and opening up the poets.